Hello and welcome to Minter Dialogue, episode number 507. My name is Minter Dial and I'm your host for this podcast. I'm a proud member of the Evergreen Podcast Network. For more information or to check out other shows in the network, please visit evergreenpodcast.com. Now this week's interview is with Martijn Schirp. Martijn is the co-founder and chief visionary officer at the Synthesis Institute that offers safe, legal, medically supervised psychedelic retreats based out of Amsterdam, the Netherlands. As they write on their site, they make the psychedelic experience accessible for curious individuals who want to utilize moderate to high doses of truffles to catalyze creative breakthroughs, explore consciousness, find meaning, improve confidence, and search for a mystical experience. In this conversation with Martijn, we discuss his journey to founding the Synthesis Institute in 2018. What has changed in our society that has brought about our crisis in mental health? The treatments they provide, the protocols they follow, and the prospects for the future. You'll find all the show notes on minterdial.com. And if you have a moment, go ahead and drop in a rating and review, and don't forget to subscribe to catch all the future episodes. Now for the show. Martijn Schirp. I hope that's a reasonable way to pronounce your name. I know there's Schiphol Airport. Martijn, you're buzzing in from Netherlands, and you and I have exchanged several times. I've been trying to follow what you're up to, and I just was so excited that you accepted to come on my show to talk about what you're up to. So let's start with what I always like to ask as a first question. Who is Martijn?
Oh, damn. That's a trick question, isn't it? Well, I guess I'm not quite sure. It seems like continually there's more to me than I am aware of, and I keep surprising myself. So, and it's hard sometimes to distinguish what is me and what is not me. It all seems to just be this mysterious unfolding, right? And so, I bought the ticket and I'm along for the ride.
Yeah, it's like the more you know you don't know.
Oh, that's true. And every time you think you know, then it turns out to be completely different. And you're like, oh, how could I be so foolish? And then a week later, you have the same trap. You get hypnotized in a certain belief that things are a certain way and they end up being very different. And that's, I don't know, learning how to go along with that, I think is half the secret.
Yeah, it is a journey.
It is.
And the more dogmatically you go about it, I think the more likely there'll be an accident.
Yeah, because I think there's just so much of the universe out there that we don't understand. And it's always inviting us to be a bit more open-minded, be a bit more compassionate. And the moment you put things into boxes and it has to be a certain way, you get attached to that, and that's causing all kinds of friction that is not necessarily necessary. So. Yeah.
Well, we have a way of making mountains out of molehills and getting very fixed ideas and attaching importance to them, when at the end of the day we all die and we go down with all these ideas and whoop-de-doo.
Yeah, we can't really take anything with us. And so, many spiritual traditions, they say it quite bluntly, you borrowed this vehicle and you gotta give it all back. And so everything that's given to you, it's temporarily in your possession, but you borrowed it, and you will have to give it up again. And so, and I try to live my life by those principles. Everything is kind of, I don't want to be all woo-wee and kind of neo spiritual, but it's, in a way, you could see everything in energy that is given to you, and you can pass it on, and that's an art, and you can, I think, develop that art into a certain competency, some certain level of skill, and I find it very enjoyable. I find it very it's a gift to give in a way, and so yeah, it really opens up the question of legacy then, like what will be left if I'm no longer here? And then okay, it kind of ties back into the first question you asked me, like who am I? And then the question, okay, who was I before I was born?
Mm.
I only have a vague recollection of that to the extent that's even possible. So
I was watching the last episode of an American series called 1883, and it's soulful in many capacities, and specifically because it also includes elements of the Native American culture, who
mm,
have such a different view on death and nature and ancestors.
mm-hmm,
And the without doing any reveal of the plot, but this one girl dies, and she says, it's so funny, we get so worried about who's going to remember me, but I'm not even going to be around to know if anyone remembered. So why am I worried about that?
mm-hmm, mm. Yeah. I like a lot of these non-Western views on ancestry and because in some of my ayahuasca visions, I saw to what extent my ancestors were still living inside of me, and and being able to connect with that and listen to that and understanding that my ancestors, even though I don't know the names of my great 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 parents or my great parents even, they'd probably be annoyed at that. Like my grandkids don't even know our names, but I'm sure they wish a beautiful future for us. And whatever genetic, karmic, linguistic traces are left, they're still resonating and living their lives through us. And so, and that comes back again to the question of legacy. Like, what are the elements that I live my life by that are worth preserving, and what are the things that I've inherited that are no longer, you know, true to form or welcome or um, yeah, helpful, skillful in our current world. And my wife and I were trying to get pregnant, and so we want to start a family if everything, if everything comes together. And so I think about that, like what is, I think every parent or future parent, or anyone who, any entrepreneur, it's anyone who wants to leave something behind or wants to make a mark on the world. I think on some level tries to ask themselves that question, right? Um, what my expression? What do I want to leave behind as a writer? I'm sure you think about that from that perspective quite often.
Mm.
How will this impact others, and how will this, diffuse to our realities? Yeah, and I think it's a worthwhile question for sure.
I'm loving where this is going, Martin. In that I've written a biography about my grandfather,
Mm,
and so I interviewed 130 veterans of the Second World War,
mm,
and
mm,
so that was a conduit into my quote unquote ancestry, knowing that he died when he was 33 in 1945, and so I never knew him. And I think rationally, anyone should be able to imagine that genetically, his semen in the egg carries with him everything up until the point of insemination. Then the question of the epigenetic elements that
mm-hmm,
impacted him after that feels a little bit more woo-woo in terms of imagining his life as a prisoner of war, the suffering that he went through, the thoughts that he went through before his death. They obviously impacted his body, his life, but that coding didn't happen at the moment of the birth. So
mm-hmm,
there, it's a little bit more of a mystical transition, right?
mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, it kind of depends on what you believe matter and energy is, right? And things are connected in a spooky manner that we don't fully understand. So that's one level. That's kind of the mystical level. And I think on another level, you just knowing that, you know, and having a similar genetic imprint, that even knowing that um, to the extent that's, not maybe not even conscious, impacts might leave a residue, might leave a, what the Buddhists call a karmic trace. And for me, like in one of my ayahuasca visions, one of my very early experiences, my grandfather on my father's side was also deeply impacted by the war, because he lost both his parents, and so he was growing up in a East German orphanage, and so the way he raised my dad and the way my dad raised him was full of, I know, like unspoken kind of slash taboo. This is how the world is. This is who we are. This is how we have to be to survive.
That's
And
just the way it is.
that's just the way it is. And so, and we, all of us have these limited perceptions of who we are, and they're very necessary. They're kind of like tools. They're personas. They get us by, right? They help us to get through the day. They get food on the table, to get the basics of our existence. But they're not necessarily true, and they can be incredibly limiting, or keep us stuck, or be dysfunctional, pathological in some level. And so for me, I was, for example, very disconnected from my emotions, simply because in our household, we did not talk about emotions, and they did not, so to speak, exist, even though they ruled a lot of the the day to day. And so, and I wasn't aware of that to almost no degree. And then all of that came rushing back, and realizing, like, oh wow, the way the people raised the orphans in that time was how I saw the world. And causing all kinds of genetic expressions and relationships and preferences. And our consciousness is like, it's not that we see the world objectively. We constantly put things in perspective, and most of our brain is trying to filter out things and trying to simplify our models, and our models just approximations. And so one of the things that psychedelics do, they suddenly just break all those models down, and suddenly you get this huge rush of bottom up information that is less filtered, or maybe unfiltered, depending on your interpretation. And then suddenly you realize, holy shit, there's all of this out there that I just didn't see, because it was constantly filtered out, because it was not seen as immediately necessary for our survival or slash procreation. And realizing, holy shit, I have this range of emotions, and I have this deep ancestry, and I have this capacity for mystical visions, and what to do with all of that, right? And I think that's kind of, I know I'm seeing this huge trend in people trying to get one of my Buddhist teachers said, the taste of the chocolate. It's like we have such a richness in material wealth these days, and we have those basic needs met, and yet sometimes, or often, there's still this sense of lack. There's still this, like, is this it? And if I'm not my role, if I'm not my career, if I'm not this, not just, I cannot be limited to any of these personas, these masks, then what else is there? And so there's been this increased rise in wanting to experience that, I think, through meditation, yoga, psychedelics, and all kinds of interesting, creative, synergistic practices that are being combined all over the world. So it's it's fascinating. It's a great time to be alive, I think, on that front. Having access to all these wisdom traditions and all these insights, and being able to compare and notes and kind of get a kind of a glimpse of what's truly in the human potential at the core of our being. And that's what interests me and it excites me for sure.
Well, in listening to you, Martin, I hear myself in these types of commentaries. And first of all, this idea of what's not said in the family, I think that still goes on in different ways. And yet we've sort of opened up the Pandora's box of allowing everybody to feel more. And I'm not sure that we're not missing having a little bit more structure. So on the one hand, I'm totally in favor of the rewiring that happens through psychedelics, the opening up to the littleness of ourselves, the bigness of our universe, and a different understanding of consciousness. On the other hand, for some people, that's extremely worrisome because they have to let go of control. And perhaps it's for them the most pertinent, but also the most risky at some level, because it can go, I'm not talking about the trip itself, but life becomes more complicated when it's not all that simple. Well, it used to be simple. I got up, went to work at 9 o'clock. I knew how to do my job. I come back home. I go to work out. I go to have lunch or dinner and then go to bed. And that seems simple. I had it coded down to something that I understood. But now I'm thinking, well, why the hell am I making widgets? Did I marry the right person? Am I happy with my friends?
Yeah. No, it is like you said, Pandora's box, and you won't be able to close it very well, and that's why Carl Jung, the eminent psychologist, transpersonal psychologist, when he spoke in his letters to friends, talking about mescaline, which was more known during that time, one of the classical psychedelics found in peyote and San Pedro cactus. Cacti, I have to say. He said, "Be careful of wisdom you have not earned," and wisdom in the sense of being able to see something you can't unsee, and so I think with psychedelics that it should come with a strong warning label, because the power of psychedelics to dissolve what we believe is true opens up this huge therapeutic potential, especially in the range of difficulties and suffering that we experience, where we're too stuck, we're too patterned in a way, and that's causing the suffering. But the same power has also the capacity to dissolve all of our defense mechanisms and coping strategies. And some people think, okay, that's great, yippee. But it's, yes, for some, perhaps, but it's all, we have them for a reason. And it is one of the more common integration difficulties that people experience. We just had a research paper coming out based on participants from our retreats at Synthesis, basically saying like the ontological shock factor, where you suddenly don't know what reality is, who you are, what are your heuristics to navigate, what is real, and that's, you know, it's not only scary, but it can be very confusing. It can be disorienting. It's rich of potential, but it also can lead to this spiritual emergence, or emergency, where it's like, God, I don't even know what the meaning is of all this. And so the capacity for sense making and so this one of the principles we adhere by is like the container is the medicine. it's not just the psychedelic that you use. The psychedelic is a catalyst, and it dissolves all these things. And you can see them in fireworks, and you have these mystical insights, or even hellish realms at times, and that can be super revealing. And even the most challenging shadow, yeah, phew, the parts to you that uh, you just almost are inherently unable to integrate because they're so deep. They're our capacity to harm, our capacity to deceive ourselves and delude ourselves, and to be greedy, be selfish, and all these things, and be limited. And there's, how crafty we can be, and that can be super liberating, realizing. But it's without that container, um, those energies can, escalate. They can lead their own lives, and you can become possessed, and that meaning you can start believing things that are even worse than before, and so there are all kinds of modern interpretations of this is this illusion, and now this life is like this, and now I have to listen to this new principle, but the principle doesn't fit, or it's not true, and so yeah, so one of the things we've been reflecting on, okay, what are the kind of the essential personal and interpersonal skill sets that people need to learn in order to go on this journey safely and skillfully. And then you have to think about shadow work, like you mentioned, but also our understanding of trauma, intergenerational, transgenerational trauma, how to talk about that, how to build self-compassion, so you don't get kicked over if something comes up for you. And there's a range of skill sets that I did not learn when I grew up in our culture, because we were completely cut off from all the kind of wisdom traditions that normally espouse these type of virtues. And but I think the struggle that we are going to as a collective as well is like, okay, if materialism is only somewhat true, and there are gaps in that world belief, and it's not about the accumulation of material good, then how do we how do we reorient ourselves so we get less attached to that, because it does give us a lot of comfort, but it can run amok, right? It's completely obscene how some people get that greed, and it's like it's never enough. And so how do we become more mature as a culture, as a species? And as leaders, how can we become aware of those gaps within our own consciousness, in shadow, and start leading from a deeper understanding of our interconnectedness, I'd say. I'll pause there for a moment. Yeah.
Really? Well, we're certainly going to get into synesthesia in a moment, but just to close on this more philosophical part is the idea that in today's society, we have the materialism. I would posit, and it's going to be something I'm going to write a lot more about, that we've got this position in large part because we have created a fantasy world, or at least a much more distant image of ourselves than who we really are. And so that gap, which we can sort of exaggerate through our presence online to show ourselves, has created a dysphoria of our personality. And I wager that, certainly what you're doing is helping us to come back to kind of a reality, whatever that reality is. And yet, there are some things which we need to know how to face without bowing to all of the good thinking that it is, because we all have shadows, we all have imperfections. Pain and death is part of our life. Mm-hmm. And rather than run away from it and then present this pristine, if not perfect, image of ourselves that we tend to want to live to, with the big houses and the materialism that comes with it, come back down to this other element of us. And then we have these conflicting ideas, don't sweat the small stuff, do go big, but the little things are so human, the little look, the wink, the touch, these little things are so important. And so I feel like so many people are confused and would benefit from a better understanding of themselves through an ayahuasca or psilocybin or any of these other types. Is that, because you talked about the taste of chocolate. I think that's a version of an experience, but it's still more in the feeling area as opposed to knowing who I am area.
Right. Well, with tasting the chocolate, I think getting a taste of ourselves as like the infinite radiance and the bliss of realizing who we are, even though we might not be able to pinpoint it exactly with words or capture it. There's this unfolding that happens, and it's deeply mysterious, and it's full of these little moments, like you said. And there's something going on that's almost dreamlike, that it's a type of consciousness, it's a type of valid consciousness that you can skillfully navigate the world through that type of consciousness. It's definitely not easy, because you can also get swept up in those delusions, but you can integrate that, and life becomes, at least in my experience, a lot more playful, a lot more loving, a lot more easy. Even in the most difficult of times, there is this natural joy that you can tap into, and that's kind of the opposite of trying to appear perfect. It's not trying to be joyful when there are real cracks. No, it's actually to connect deeply with your pain and suffering, and realize that that's all the symphony of reality, like playing through you as an instrument. And I think that's what psychedelics can do, because it can wipe away these really deep-seated beliefs of who we are, and allow us to kind of look at ourselves in the world with new eyes, and especially the sensitivity towards nature, towards each other, towards things that really make us tick, like things that are at the core meaningful. And I'm talking about our relationships, our passions, and that often get like a backseat because they don't necessarily immediately seem to provide status, importance, safety. But at the core, actually, they do. They're way more important. And if you're incongruent between the two, suffering is guaranteed. Of that, I'm quite certain.
Hey, small business leaders, are you looking for an easier way to onboard and manage remote employees? Or are you feeling you're just doing it all at your company? JustWorks makes it easier for you to start, run, and grow a business. So let me tell you how JustWorks can help your business. Give you an example. For anyone who follows my work, you'll know how deeply I believe that great people are at the heart of every business. And JustWorks can help you attract and retain top talent in a competitive market, because their platform gives you access to rich benefits, usually only available to large corporations, plus a range of health, fitness, and financial perks, because you and your team deserve them too. And on top of that, the way people are working is changing, and you need human resources tools that can keep up. Whether your team is local, remote, or distributed, JustWorks helps you comply with state payroll tax requirements, keep up with their state labor laws, and access health insurance plans in any state. They also provide proactive support for federal, state, and local employment-related compliance needs. JustWorks makes it simple to hire and manage remote employees across all 50 states of the United States. It's a cloud-based platform that enables managers and employees alike to quickly and securely access benefits, payroll, and other HR functionality from anywhere, anytime. They provide an intuitive, self-service user experience that makes admin easier for the whole team. And they provide help when you need it with 24/7 expert support for you and your employees. By the way, JustWorks believes it's your right as a customer to have a phenomenal service experience every time. Also provides access to certified HR consultants who can provide tailored guidance and best practices around managing your people. With transparent pricing, with no hidden costs, so you always know exactly what you're paying for. You can run your business, therefore, with confidence with JustWorks. So take a look at JustWorks transparent pricing by visiting justworks.com/pricing. That's justworks.com/pricing for details. Yes, it's like our mutual friend Jamie Wheel talks about the crisis of meaning, and
Right.
that gap which we have. All right, so let's get into what you're up to, because you very modestly described yourself, but you're also an entrepreneur. You've founded several companies, including High Existence, and now you're the co-founder and chief visionary officer of the Synthesis Institute, which is based in the Netherlands, which, as I understand it, provides psychedelic assisted therapy under a very strict protocol with very serious people in your organization, and which is really why I wanted to have you on. There are others trying to do this, I think, different ways. So describe the Synthesis expansion retreat, at least what your business is up to, how many people work for you. Give us some understanding of the Synthesis business.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity. So just one small correction, just to start out with, we don't offer therapy, even though we work with a lot of different therapists. Currently, psilocybin is not a registered medicine. And so we offer psychedelic journeys, experiences, the container, if you will, informed by therapeutic principles, and not necessarily limited to those principles, in a kind of safe and professional manner. And so one of our main programs is called indeed Expansion, which is basically an allusion to this idea that we are a lot more beyond our limits, and we can taste the chocolate if we prepare ourselves and we are supported by professionals that have experience and can provide the kind of the safety and the structure for you to fully let go and surrender, or allow yourselves to relax the parts of ourselves that on a subconscious level we feel or deeply believe we need to always have with us, to be vigilant, and otherwise we get hurt, or that can be trauma, that can be other aspects of our personality, our career choices, our identity, our language, our the color of our skin. There are many ways we do this, and so we provide kind of this whole journey for people to experience that openness, that journey into our unconscious that is much vaster, and then I think we ordinarily experience. If some people are more maybe gifted in dream work, and they're very rich, and they remember all of that, or they might become lucid in those, that's they might have a better taste of it. But often, if we're so focused on materiality, that drives our consciousness, and that has a certain flavor to it, versus people and cultures that don't have that, and it's dependent on our on many factors, and conditions. But so that's what we do with Expansion in our retreats, and then we also train psychedelic practitioners in a 13-month program. And then part of that, if you want to, you can also experience the the meeting the mushroom directly and get practicum hours as well. And then recently we've been expanding towards the US. And so we have a retreat center there in Oregon where they just moved ahead with legalization. It's not open yet. We're applying for a license service center application soon. But our training is approved right now. And so that is very exciting. I did not expect when we started Synthesis, I did not expect the US to open up as well. And Colorado is right behind them. And so there seems to be this this counter movement. There's this strong movement of the last decade or so of the medicalization of psychedelics, seeing it as a therapeutic tool for therapists to use for all kinds of conditions, mostly conditions where people feel stuck and they do this patterning that's not helpful. But as Michael Pollan in his book, How to Change Your Mind, also argues
great
book, highly recommended. It's also for the betterment of well people. And so what we see is, so we're not ready to offer therapeutic containers, but in our research with Imperial College in London, people report on average significant reductions in anxiety, in stress, in depression, in something called experiential avoidance, which actually causes a lot of difficulties because it feeds addiction or in avoiding the difficult conversation or the work that you have to do, or those aspects of our feeling, our sense system that we get stuck in, and often that's determined by avoidance or strong desires. And so, that's kind of what we do. We've been operational for slightly over or almost 5 years now. So it's
fantastic.
It's been quite a ride, yeah.
So thank you for correcting me. The psilocybin is not permitted in Netherlands. I was listening to some news outlet saying that in Canada, they have a province that's essentially legalizing all, let's call them hard drugs, including heroin, or at least to have it on you under a certain, I think 2.5 grams, and assuming that obviously would include all the psychedelics. So you do feel that there is a liberalizing of this concept, and under the medical capacity, Johns Hopkins and others studying all the ways it can help with these different pathologies. In the Netherlands, you're not medical therapists or anything like that. You provide this experience. In Oregon and Colorado, do you think there will be more room for therapeutic work on pathologies,
yes.
or is it going to be more like your experience in Netherlands?
So there are different movements. There's the medicalization that we talked about. Then there's the decriminalization, which basically take the use of drugs and mind expansion or mind exploration as perhaps a moral issue on some level, but not a criminal issue anymore. The same that I've done with Portugal, and they've seen amazing results with that. The same as the Netherlands has a very liberal historical stance with that as well. If you treat drug users that are abusing drugs or they're struggling with their use as a mental health problem versus a criminal problem, you get way better results. And so many states and cities and counties in the US have moved the decrim bills. And then on top of that, you have in Colorado, following Oregon, actually legalization efforts. And that allows it to move outside, especially the psychedelics, outside of the realm of just personal use. You can actually create organizations and you can build structure and you can maybe get reimbursements and insurance. And so you can have a thriving kind of ecosystem evolve. And then the question becomes, okay, how do we educate the general public? So from a harm reduction perspective, how do we develop like in-depth screening because people are very complex, and how can we make sure that those who are not ready can make an informed choice. And this is one of the deeper philosophical questions again, which is how can you consent to something that fundamentally changes you because the person you'll be after cannot consent to that because you don't know who you'll be, right? If there's some of these fundamental ideas and identifications that we have about ourselves dissolve, then who did the consenting? So that's the
Pre-me or
question.
post-me?
Yeah, exactly. And so in Oregon, it's the psilocybin cubensis mushroom that is legalized. In Colorado, they will move forward with also the other natural psychedelics like iboga, ayahuasca, San Pedro, and a few others. And yeah, it's actually interesting. I don't know when this podcast comes out, but we have a conference in it's the first now, is it? Yeah. So in 2 weeks or on the 17th, called the Fundamentals of Psychedelics. And one of our speakers, Dr. Tony Beck, he's a physician and Zen practitioner for a few decades. And he sees the medical system is in the US specifically, it's quite broken, especially when it comes to mental health. It's rising. And so how do we meet the moment with compassion, even though we as a culture maybe are not fully understanding what these things are? We might not have all the skill sets, we might not have the fundamental competence, and yet there's this huge need of suffering that could be addressed. Eating disorders, depression, anxiety, abuse, all kinds of trauma. And so that's kind of like, how can we build these containers quickly with at least enough safety so we can kind of figure out what the hell is going on here? And of course, borrowing and leaning on and in communication with all kinds of contemplative wisdom traditions, either shamanistic or Buddhist informed or Christian mysticism or other frameworks that can help people kind of scaffold the meaning and the structure, the life after this. And there are pathways. There's enough wisdom we've collected over many generations that can be informative. We just need to maybe translate that for the modern mind.
So much in there, Martin. So first observation, which didn't talk about, but I think is something that is unfortunate in this domain. Obviously, there's the decriminalization and the moral aspects. And there's also a holding of a higher standard than other drugs that are created by pharmaceutical companies to look at psychedelics. I mean, for someone as I have, who has had many experiences, the first thing people say, "Oh, didn't you hear about the guy who jumped off a cliff?" Or and that's 1 out of 1,000,000, but that's the story that gets told. I mean, I don't mean to belittle that by any means, but as and the rates of improvement and lasting improvement against addiction or post-traumatic disorder are so high compared to the absolute numbskullery of the types of reports and tests that pharmaceuticals are doing. And it brings up for me a singular point, which I want to circle back with what you were talking about, which is making well people better. Because in the end of the day, if as the DSM allows, there are so many more pathologies, it's a way of running away from myself, in my opinion, because I can label my thing, which let's call it shit in life, and therefore distance myself, remove responsibility from the issue, because it's this thing I have in the DSM, which allows for a pharmaceutical or a prescription and a way to treat it. Whereas if we thought of most of our, let's say, you grieve someone, or you're feeling sad about not failing at an exam or losing a football match, for God's sake, whatever. Well, inshallah, that is what it is about, is dealing with the journey, is dealing with the change and the challenge and the pain, and then the fact that we die. And the fact that you're sad about that, well, that's part of, let's say, the integrations of that in life. And so if we removed it from pathologies and we thought more about, well, this is just what life's about. So this is well people that are sad. These are well people that have had a challenge or have lost somebody, as opposed to the other way around, where we tend to labelize and then medicate against.
Yeah, and not to belittle, like pharmaceuticals help a subset of people, and
Sure.
and those who find benefit, that's great. But then there's this huge range of folks who get it. Like I've talked to many clients back in the day. So I don't have that direct connection since my roles have changed over the years, but there were many people, predominantly from the US, who shared, for example, I lost my mom, and then I lost my job, and I had to find a new job because because my job was tied to health insurance, and so I was prescribed SSRIs and then an anti-anxiety for sleep, and then on top, to manage the symptoms of this and that, and so
then addiction.
And then it's like super over medicated, and 10 years later, it's like, what am I doing? And so, there's a huge array of critical literature on the medicalization, or the idea of being sane and normal. It has this deep normative function where it's like, okay, there's this range that is acceptable, and you have to get an education, you have to be a good employee and a good citizen of the state, and anything outside of that, there's only very limited kind of tolerated subversive containers or niches where you allow. But if you go outside of that, the state will justify its exclusivity on power to drug you, to lock you up, to
Big Brother will be watching, and Soma, here we come.
Certainly. And so that psychedelics fit in that category for 50, 60 years. Even researching it was career suicide. And that's kind of the only, like, they researched the atomic bomb, but LSD was illegal, which is one of the most extreme forces of state intervention in the domain of human knowledge seeking. And so it's there's a power in conscious exploration, and which the church knew very well. There were all kinds of different mystical sects over the years that
totally the kooky on.
Yeah. And so yeah, and then of course you have the classical argument, alcohol, for example, just to name one, nicotine, the amount of just completely normalized casualties that happen, nobody bats an eye, and that impacts our children and our children, like our grandchildren. Like they start drinking from a very young age, and the impact of that is horrendous. And so in comparison, in your country, Dr. David Nutt famously got the boot because he said MDMA is safer than riding a horse, which statistically is true. And so why do we accept certain activities and condone it? And the reason for that is, part of it is just, our historical conditions, but part of that is also the subversive nature. And we can look at the 60s and 70s in the US of a culture that it was deeply traumatized by this upswelling of this openness to different cultures and this resistance to how things were and this questioning of the values of our society. And it gave birth to conservative movement, the ecological perspectives, to women empowerment, anti-war, anti-racism, egalitarianism, and so it was super rich, in that time, and that got squashed like insanely with the power of the state, if you will. And we're now 50, 60 years further down the road, and one could argue that the whole psychedelic current movement is sterilized of that subversive undercurrent, because now you have to be screened and have to be in a medical office, and
Don't forget the tax man.
Don't forget the tax man. Yeah, like the difficulty of doing this work, like one of the often perspectives we're getting, like, since this is so expensive, and like, yeah, I agree, it is way too expensive, but all these costs that we have to incur in order to do something that doesn't fit any legal category, or banks don't want to work with us. It's all these difficulties, and basically all we do is allowing people to explore their minds with a mushroom. We're primates being curious, and it helps us, it heals us, it connects us. And if done, there are some risks, but everything has risk, and we can easily mitigate them.
Going out your door and taking a taxi has risks. You might get run over on the way. You might get bitten by a mosquito that gives you some kind of illness, and then the taxi might have an accident. And my gum, life is full of risks, which is why I wanted to have you on the show. So we need to wind up, because time is a thing, dogma of time. I love the exploration of time and the mind and expansion. However, we need to close down here. And I want people to know how they can and how much it costs right now with what you're offering at Synthesis, so that people can maybe look up and do a psychedelic retreat. I call it a journey that opens the wonderful world. So what's the best way to follow you, read what you write, your research, and figure out more about Synthesis?
Yeah, so the best way to keep track of what we do is just going to either synthesisretreat.com or synthesisinstitute.com and sign up for the newsletter. We have, I don't know when it, like I said, I don't know when this podcast is coming out, but the 17th of February, if you want to have a small taste of what we do, it's going to be a very special non-conference conference where we go deeply into some of these somatic and contemplative practices and viewpoints that I think in itself, that container is psychedelic and won't leave you untouched. Otherwise, that will be on demand. And we have retreats in the Netherlands. They're about 6,000 euros. And then we also have the next cohort of our training, both in US and Europe, opening up in March. And yeah, if you're a practitioner and you are a coach or anyone who either wants to become a psychedelic facilitator, work with psychedelics, or understands the value of a psychedelic approach to whatever you're doing as a professional, that is a very fruitful exploration to go deep inside and explore all these potentials that we have.
Thank you, Martin. I'll put all those in the show notes. This will actually be going out just a couple of days after your event, but I'm going to make sure that we get the on-demand ability to check it out, what's happening. And I hope to have a chance to visit you, maybe even do a retreat. Thanks very much, Martin.
Such a pleasure. Thank you so much, Minter.
Thanks for having listened to this episode of the Minter Dialogue podcast. If you like the show and would like to support me, please consider a donation on patreon.com/MinterDial. You can also subscribe on your favorite podcast service. And as ever, rating and reviews are the real currency for podcasts. You'll find the show notes with over 2,000 and more blog posts on minterdial.com. Check out my documentary film and 4 books, including my last one, You Lead, How Being Yourself Makes You a Better Leader. And to finish, here's a song I wrote with Stephanie Singer, A Convinced Man.
A stranger tucked around me, precipitating the danger to feel free. Trust is the reason, still I won't toe the line. I sit here passively, hope for your respect, anticipating the thrill of your intellect. Maybe I tell myself there's no use in me lying. I'm a convinced man, building an urge. I'm a convinced man, to live and die submerged. A convinced man, in the arms of a woman. I'm a convinced man, challenge my fate. I'm a convinced man, competition's innate. A convinced man, in the arms of a woman. Despise revenges and struggle with deceit. Live for the challenge so life's not incomplete. What's wrong with challenge? I know soon we all die. I like the feel of a stranger tucked around me, precipitating the danger to feel free. Trust in my reason and let me show you why. I'm a convinced man, practicing my lines. I'm a convinced man, here in these confines. A convinced man, in the arms of a woman. I'm a convinced man, admit to the test. I'm a convinced man, I'm ready for an arrest. I'm a convinced man, in the arms of a woman.
Do you love news about LinkedIn, Indeed, Google, and just about every other recruitment tech company out there?
Hell yeah. I'm Chad.
I'm Cheese.
We're the Chad and Cheese Podcast.
All the latest recruiting news and insights are on our show.
Dripping in snark and attitude.
Subscribe today wherever you listen to your podcasts.
We out.